Okay, today we're going to move on with part 2 of this initial series. At least there will be 3 parts in the original initial part of my after the collapse type section. That may grow into other areas. That will depend on how it goes. This section will be about tools, and this is probably, in my opinion, the most important part of the whole conversation that we're having, the whole discussion. Tools to make other tools is probably the single most important thing that you're going to carry with you. That's what I'm saying. Tools to make other tools. When we leave, or if we have to leave, assuming home and vacate out somewhere into a bush shelter, unless you have a specific place that you've already got you can go to, for example, a very, very remote hunt camp or something similar to that where you can be very isolated and there won't be other people around, because we want to remember that stealth will very probably be a big part of surviving. So let's assuming for the moment that we don't have that, and so we're basically going out with what we've got packed with us. I think, I've seen a lot of videos where they've made these little brush shelters and so on, and they just, you can't live in something like that. You can't live in something that you can't stand up in. We all, and some of us more than others, even for myself, where I live in a very remote area, I spend a great deal of time outdoors. I still come home to a conventional house. I flick a switch and the lights go on. I turn a dial, and the stove comes on, and so on and so on and so on. There's going to be a huge transition time, or transition adjustment, from going from having everything at our fingertips to not having any of that. Everything that we are going to have, we're going to have to provide for ourselves, manually for the most part. So tools are what's going to basically allow us to do that, and the skills, as we've said before. So let's start off with the simplest things. The knife that we've made, that's just turned out to be a great knife. I can't say enough about it, and it's not just because that I made it, but this thing's amazing. I've used it now to skin out part of a deer, which I'm tanning right now, the hide, and boy, I'll tell you, that was just, I don't want to toot the horn too much with this thing, because because I made it and so on, and I've only used it for approximately a month now, so I don't want to sort of sound like I'm really building it up, but it is probably the best knife, I think, and darn sharp, one of the best knives I've ever held in my hand. The weight is, I like something with some weight to it. The weight, the balance, it's this material, this steel, this 5160 steel, holds an edge and takes an edge incredibly. So that's one cutting tool. Something everybody is familiar with is the folding saw, and that's pretty standard. This one is Fisker's. It's like $20. It's not nearly the price of some of these other fancy ones that you see people promoting on TV or on videos or wherever. Nothing wrong with Baca or any of the Silkies, any of these other saws, except that they're extremely expensive. This has a lifetime guarantee. I've had this for probably a year and a half now. I have a second one that I've had even longer than that, which is slightly shorter, and I've actually kept that one separate for when I'm butchering, for splitting the rib cages and so on, the breastbones and whatnot. But at any rate, these things come with a lifetime warranty. They work great, and they're $20 or $22. This is my main saw, and this saw is one that has been, it is a pruning saw, actually, and it was my father's, and now, so I can't even tell you how old this thing is. So it's got the coarse teeth on the one side and the finer teeth on the other side. When I got it, it had been just left in the toolbox, so it was rusty, so I cleaned it up, took the handle off, and just refinished it with a little bit of just basically some oil. And this saw is awesome. And one of these videos I'm going to make a sheath for this. I had talked about making sheaths, and I only ended up making the one out of birch bark. So I'm going to make a sheath out of what I call common man's kydex, which is a real handy thing to make knife sheaths out of, but I'm also going to make one for this so that I can just tuck it into my pack. Another part of my toolkit, and this is a very important part, is my little roll here, and I'm going to make another one because I simply have more tools now than will fit in here. In this I keep a curved chisel. That's great for cookses and so on like that. This is one that I purchased. I keep a carpenter's pencil, and I like the flat carpenter's pencil. They are flat so that they don't roll. That's why they have a flat pencil for carpenters, so that if you set it down on something, or maybe you're on a roof or wherever, you can set your pencil down, it's not going to roll away. So that's a very handy thing to have, because you want to sometimes trace out or mark out a cutting line. I have these old drill bits, the augers, and I have them in quite a few sizes. This one is an adjustable one, and these things, if you're building a structure or whatever, you can bore a hole into it. You probably won't have nails, so you can bore a hole through one of your logs into the second log, and then carve yourself a peg and pound it in. And the way I use these, I haven't done anything to modify these. What I have done is I've made this little handle. This is just a piece of a black iron pipe. This happens to be plated, which doesn't really make any difference whatsoever, except that's what was available. So it's just a T. And all I did was I bought a straight plug for the one end, and that plug was just one solid plug, and I drilled a hole in the end of that plug, and then I got a file. You got to take some time doing this stuff. And I got a file, and I drilled out a center hole, and then I took a small square file and I filed that out so that we can fit that inside. So that fits right inside there, and I made the hole the right size so that because some of these have different sized ends on them, so I made that so that it will take the different sizes. And this one has a fairly large one, but still it will go in and take that size. And I have probably, oh my golly, there's probably a dozen of these that I've got here, and I'm going to see if I can find one with this. Okay, here's something quite different. This is also just a curved shape, more of a scraper, but because it's got it'll still fit in there. So now all I need is I don't think this will fit, but no, this is actually the part of my fire kit. But all you need is a piece of wood, a branch that you can get anywhere when you're out there, as long as you're in an area where there's trees. You push it through there, and now you've got a T-handle to turn your auger just like this, and you can T-handle it around, and you can get the job done. And these augers come in all kinds of sizes. As you can see, this one's an inch. This one, I believe, is a quarter of an inch. There's one right there with that very small end on it. But even still, that will still work. You got to file that just to be the right size so that this one can go all the way in. And the larger ones won't go all the way in, but they'll go in far enough to get the job done. That's a real handy part of your kit to have. Move these back out of the way again. Put them over here. This is a chisel that I made. This is made out of a file. I just put a handle on it. These things work really good, as you can, that's sharp too. As you can tell, files are made out of pretty good steel. That's why they work. Here's another small carving knife that I've made. This one was made out of a piece of a circular saw blade, and I've just cut that out. So that's just for fine carving. If I want to do anything that's quite intricate, where you certainly aren't going to be able to use a big knife, I could also use probably a smaller knife, like a Puko type knife, but I've made this, and that's for more intricate work. That can slide right in here. These types of kits, now I have other tools that I want to put in here, so that's why this pouch will have to be either added to, I think I'll just add to it. Either way, I'm going to have, because I've acquired more of these different sized augers and so on. So there's other things that I want to put in here. So another part that goes with the augers and or smaller drills as well is the brace and bit. Well, those are the bits, and here's the brace. This is a pretty old one, but it's still a little bit fancy. It swivels, but I have 2 or 3 of these, more basic than this one generally, but it gives you the opportunity, especially with some of the smaller drills where you don't need as much power to torque through it, to go ahead and drill smaller holes. If you're putting together, the pegs that you use don't have to be huge like you would if you were splicing together the logs in your cabin, but you might make small pegs, since we don't have nails probably, and use them when you're putting together furniture or any smaller window frames or whatever the case may be. Another item that was in another one of my videos is this little wire bender. This is the one that I use as a wire tie, and just a roll of wire. Now this is standard wire, nothing fancy about this. I also have a couple of rolls of stainless steel wire, which would be more practical. So just another part that goes along with the basic hand tool kit that you'll be using, or will you want to be using. Obviously the fro that we made, here it is in all its glory, handled up, all nice and ready to go. If you're going to be building a cabin or some kind of a wigwam or longhouse or something, you're going to need to be splitting material. This is a great way to do it, and this is the handle can be removed. As a matter of fact, in all these tools, for the most part, they go together similar to a tomahawk handle. So as far as the bulk of it and so on, if you're having to travel a long way, it's made so that you can take the handle off. You could just take the tool and don't take the handle at all. That's just more weight and more bulk to carry. Take the tool. Take a whole lot of these different tools that you've made, or that I do when I've made them, and then when I get there, I'll just make a handle, and then that handle could actually be one handle fits all kind of a thing, and all I have to do is make one handle or maybe 2, and I've now got everything I need to make everything I need. These things will give you the opportunity to build anything from a conventional and pretty intricate log cabin, or as I said, you could build a wigwam, but build something that's going to be durable. It's going to be spacious. You've got a big adjustment to make, as I've said. You've got to be able to get this done in a way that's not going to drive you a little bit crazy. And you don't know what season you're going to be getting there. You may have very limited amount of time to get something together before the inclement weather hits. In my case, that would be very, very cold weather. And you may have to put up a wigwam or something for the first season to get you through the winter, and then keep that, because they're always handy to use as storage or whatever, and then build your better structure. It's always wise to have 2 structures some distance apart. If there was a fire, for example, and something happened and your structure caught fire and burnt during the winter, suddenly you're out in the cold. That could be, and maybe a lot of your items have been burnt in the fire. You're kind of out of luck. If you've got a second structure where you keep a duplicate set of certain tools and some supplies and clothing, then as long as you can make it to that second structure, you've got that safety valve. There's nowhere else to go. There's nobody to call when you're in a situation like that. So you have to be prepared for yourself. Another thing that you want to have is an intricate sewing kit. Let me just step over here for a moment. I also have these guys here. I just took this out of my sewing kit just because I didn't want to spread everything out all over the place here. This is a speedy stitcher, and inside of it, it has the needles that are for this machine. And here's a good stout needle. These are for stitching leather or canvas or whatever. And you set that in the top here. I can see what I'm doing. Like that. You put your thread in the bobbin down here. It comes out through the hole, up through this little groove, through the hole in the needle, and through your cap here. The cap gets threaded on, and now you've got a stitcher that actually has a supply of material, and the type of material that this is made to use is this heavy waxed nylon. This is 150 yards. There's probably a little bit off of this one. I've used up, well, I've had this thing for 25 years or something, so I've used up, I don't know how many of these spools of this stuff, but that's exceptionally strong stuff. It comes in a fine and a coarse. I like the coarse one just because it's more durable. And that stuff is so strong that if you were to try to hold it and pull it apart to break it, you would cut your hand before you would actually break that thread, we'll call it. It's a string or whatever. But this is what you might consider to be a sail needle. Three-sided with a great big end on it. And this is made also for heavy sewing. And it would stitch through canvases and so on like that. It's not just your socks or your t-shirt that you may have to fix. You may have to fix your pack. Your pack may get a tear in it. You may in fact actually have to make some of these things if you're out there. This is the pack that I made, and I wanted a nice pack that was made out of canvas, and I was having a hard time finding the one that wasn't $400. So I made this one. I bought the canvas and I just laid it out. I've made this. It's double thick. I've done the it's just waxed canvas, or basically it's waxed oiled, I guess is what they call it. And I've braided jute as the tie string here. This is the flap that goes over with the leather. All this is stitched for the most part by hand with that Speedy Stitcher. And boy, I'll tell you, you want to believe it does a tough job. I've had this pack now for probably a good year at least. I've used it constantly out in the bush around here, and there's not a mark on it. Now there are other ways of getting materials that you need. I guess actually quickly before I go through that, don't forget the most obvious things that would be considered also tools. Not only is my axe, now that's a Husqvarna small forest axe, 26-inch handle with about a 2 1/4 pound head. That is my go-to everything axe. That is it. The small one beside it is about a pound and 3/4, I believe, or a pound and a half hatchet. That's basically one that I don't normally carry. I keep that as a carving hatchet, and I've done a single bevel on it. One side I've straightened out, and the other side has the full bevel instead of having partly on both sides. And I just find personally, that's a personal taste, that that's the way I like to handle them and use them. It works better for me. Some of the other items that I don't have in here because there's just only so much I can bring inside to show you. And we're having a blizzard outside, and there's wind blowing and drifting and snow a couple of feet deep, so it's just not practical to try to shoot this video outdoors. Things for building that a lot of people don't even know about or would never remember because it's before your time, and unless you study history in some ways. But look at the old pioneer ways. Look at the videos and the information in the books that show pioneers or discuss how the pioneers did things. They would use a cant hook, which is a tool for moving logs around because they're just too heavy to lift. If you look back into my video selection, there will be the cant lift video, and that's basically where I took a cant hook, or made a cant hook, but I redesigned it with a bit of a framework and a handle so that you can not only use it to roll a log and pull a log around a little bit, but you can always use it for picking up the short rounds after you've cut them to take them for splitting, because some of them can be pretty heavy, and this is a tool to help you move those things. Picaroons, again, another tool that they would use in logging and so on, which might be necessary for you when the time comes, because you know you're technically going to be involved in logging if you're trying to build yourself a structure to live in the future. Log dogs, even the froe for making shingles and splitting, for splitting boards into, if you wanted a board floor, anything that you needed a split board for, that's the way you're going to have to get it. Log dogs are basically a piece of, well, the ones I made are just a piece of rebar, and I've bent it slightly longer, so it's here. Let me get this. This is a piece of rebar from my cooking set. This is my squirrel cooker end, but this is basically what would be a log dog. It's just a piece of rebar. Around here, the trees aren't that big for the most part. So I would want this straight section to be a little bit longer than the width of one of those logs. So most of the logs I'm going to be dealing with are probably 5 or 6 inches, perhaps a bit less. So I'm going to want this to be somewhere between 10 and 12 inches. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend this end down on a 90-degree, approximately 90 degrees, don't get crazy with that. And I'm going to have that thing probably somewhere between 4 and 6 inches long. Again, it depends on the size of your logs. It probably can't really be too long. You can do exactly the same thing on the other end, the same distance, basically. So what you're going to have kind of a flat U, flat top instead of curvature, but you're going to have and what you do is you stick one end into one log, and then and that end has got a little chisel point ground into it, same the other end. You stick that into one log, you stick the other end into the other log when they're butted together, not butt ends, but side to side. And that means they can't move and wiggle around, and that means you can use them, or even if you're trying to use a draw knife to skin the logs, you can lock it down onto whatever surface you're using. You can hook the log and pound the other end into your, your sawhorse or whatever you're using to anchor that log so it doesn't roll around on you. You don't want it to roll off and land on your leg, for one thing, and certainly it makes it easier to do the skinning or whatever else you're doing with it. And then you can take your draw knife and work your way down the log. And that brings us to other things, tools like the froe and the draw knife, and it's not just a simple axe. You probably won't have a chainsaw. Now, this brings us back a little bit again to the idea of having comfort tools initially. If you can take the weight of a chainsaw and a tank or fuel, even if that only gets you your cabin built or your structure of whatever sort, and the first year or two is where the firewood cut, that really helps break that transition period. So that's probably not a bad thing at all if you can carry it. Be prepared to have a better saw and have these other manual pieces of equipment, because they won't let you down and they don't run out of fuel in the future. When you take a chainsaw or anything like that, you know that it's going to fail in a fairly short period of time, simply because you won't have any fuel for it anymore. So it's something that you are basically, it's a lost item. You're carrying that weight. However, what it can do for you while you do have it running can make a huge difference. So, there are other items, of course, other than chainsaws. So keep that in mind. Sometimes it's worth taking these things if you can take the extra weight, if you've got some form of conveyance to do that, whether it's by boat or whatever. That can really make that transition time a whole lot better and give you a huge step forward in survival. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, in addition to, and I can't possibly cover all the items that you're going to need in this video. It's endless. You're going to need any tool that you will require to make or maintain everything that you have, basically. There may be some things that you just can't fix, and in which case you're going to have to be prepared to do without those at some point in time. Now, the general idea with this type of thing is don't take electronics, don't take gadgets, don't take battery operated items. Definitely don't take dogs. They're a pain. And they eat a lot, don't you? Yeah. But that's not necessarily the truth, because this is, as I said, going to be a huge transition, and initially we need a buffer zone, a buffer time to, please don't do that. We need a buffer zone or a buffer time in order to be able to make the adjustments, both mental and physical, and even the time it would take to make a new home of whatever description it might be. And there's a certain amount of comfort you need during that time to keep your morale up, because chances are this probably happened fairly suddenly. Even if it was only a couple of weeks' notice, that's still relatively suddenly compared to the fact that you've lived, the way you live for your entire life. So make sure that you think through, and it's amazing, if you start to sit down and make a list of the things that you use on a daily basis. I started to do that. I was going to use it in the video here. This would have been a 7-hour video. Just think of every little piece, every pencil that you pick up, your coffee cup, to make the coffee, a hairbrush, a toothbrush, I mean, a pack of matches or a lighter or your clothing and a belt and every socks and shoes and spare shoelaces, you name it, it's just bizarre. The things, not to mention then every item that you use when you're cooking, it's not just your pots and pans, your spatulas and forks and knives and spoons and dishes and teapots and you get the point. So be prepared to and start working on the skills. There are a lot of good books out there. That's where I got some of my information. And then you can only learn so much from a book. It gives you the basics of how you're supposed to get going on this. Then it's up to you to actually go out and do it, because even when you read it very carefully, and even if it's a well-written book, it's one thing to hear it. It's a whole other ball game to actually go out and do it and make it work the way you expect it to work. This is where skills come into it. You have to learn. I make my own soap. I've made it for years. I can go and buy a bar of soap, so can anybody else, but that won't be the option in the future. So learn those skills. I'm tanning a hide right now. As I mentioned, there's some salt there that I was using. I just salted the hide for the second time. I'm going to rinse that off. I'm going to wash it all out really well in detergent, and then I'm going to start applying the tanning formula. These skills are things that seem bizarre now, are going to be absolutely required. Think of everything that the pioneers did. That's basically where it's going to go. So that's all things that you need to do. And if you've seen my forge, which is now buried under several feet of snow, but you've all seen that if you've watched my videos. You know at least some of the things that can be done there. And one thing I'll tell you, when people go, when something does happen, and people are all in a panic, and the first thing they're going to do is run down to Walmart or wherever, or any other big box store, and I'm not picking on Walmart by any means, and they're going to try and score everything that they can get, because they weren't prepared. Well, everybody else is going to be doing the same thing, so it's not a good place to be. First off, the shelves will be bare in no time. Whatever might be left is something that's been picked over that nobody wants anyways, for the most part, maybe not. Even if you come out of Walmart with a shopping cart full of goodies, because you were lucky enough to get there in time to make a good grab, when you head out into the parking lot to get to your vehicle, somebody out there who either hasn't got the money or hasn't been able to get in or has realized that they've gotten in and there's nothing left, you're going to be a prime target for somebody to come and get that from you before you even get to your car, let alone get it home. So the first thing people are going to say, well, let's run in there, let's get let's get food, let's get all the food we can, get stuff that's preserved in cans or whatever. My thoughts are, let's go and get a couple of bags of kitty litter, and I can tell you why that's going to be in the future. Johnny, you go over and you get all the files and drill bits you can get your hands on. Go and get them all. Jim, you go over and you get sandpaper. Get every piece of sandpaper that's left. This type of thing. And those are the things that are going to be able to allow you to continue on long term. You can fix what you've got. You can repair what you've got. Things that will be in abundance in a apocalyptic type situation will be raw materials that people don't know what to do with, or don't even know that you could do something with it. I don't think there's a small town, even where I live, that doesn't have a wrecking yard, salvage yard, whatever you want to call it. And it's just full of every kind of steel and metal, and everything that you can imagine ends up in these places. It's just a prime place for material. Take a hood off a truck or something and hack a piece of steel out of it, and now you've got a great big piece of steel that you can use to make whatever might be necessary, a basin or beat it all up into little arrowheads, anything. You've got unlimited resources in a place like that. Not the first place most people are going to go. You're not going to be rushed and crowded by other preppers, sort of thing, who are going there. You're going to be initially on your own, and maybe down the road also. And you can find half this stuff in the bush. You don't have to go to a proper wrecking yard, and that's a sad story, but nevertheless, it's a true thing. So these types of things, and I could go on, and I could make a list, like I said, of sharpening stones for your gear, anything that you need to maintain your tools that you're going to use to maintain your items and make new items. This is what has to be first and foremost on your mind. And the second thing I guess first and foremost is to learn what you're going to do with these things and how to take advantage of them. Learn to see what something can be. Learn to see it as a piece of material rather than as whatever item it happens to be shaped into at the moment. You know, that car hood is probably relatively useless to you. I suppose if you could get enough of them, you could sort of bunch them all up together and use them for the roof of your shelter or something. You know, nothing wrong with that. It's certainly sturdy, and you know, if you overlapped them and got it done properly, it's probably pretty waterproof. But it's a lot more than that. There's springs and there's jack handles and there's, you know, half the time I've gone in there and found axe heads that people are too lazy or don't even think about putting a handle on it again. They just go buy another axe. Like, what are people thinking? But that kind of craziness or just plain wastefulness in the long run will probably be like it'll be like gold to the people who know what to go and get and what to do with it when they find it. So this video, as I said, isn't really too complete because there's just too much involved. All I can suggest is actually sit down and try and make that list. There are some books and places on the internet, I suppose, where you could probably find lists that are pre-made, and I wouldn't necessarily go by those, but they can certainly be a great guideline. You know, go and look through what they've got listed there, and then add and subtract as you see fit, as you see necessary. But again, tanning hides, making soap, all these different things that you need to be able to do because you're not going to be able to get them anywhere else. So I want to thank you for watching. I hope this has been not so much instructional, but maybe motivational a little bit. Makes you think a little bit about looking outside the box, as the saying goes. Look at items for what you can get out of them, what you can exploit them into, if you want to put it that way. I don't really like that word much, but nevertheless, that's pretty much it. And you know, these things are going to be what's available in abundance, because most people aren't going to know or even think of going to the wrecking yard to get the supplies they need. You know, we're so tuned into the idea of going and buying and buying and buying, purchasing. Throw something away. Don't attempt to fix it. Just throw it away. Get another one. It's too easy, and we've become so accustomed to that. But like I said, the bonus of that is, even though it wasn't intentional, is that it gives us the resources to use in the future when we can't just go and buy things. So thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've enjoyed it and you know anybody else who might be interested in this type of thing, please share it with them or mention it to them. And I want to see you again when we go into phase 3, which will be basically food and cooking, and that's not quite as simple as it might sound. And Timber here he's giving me the eye, saying, do you remember everything? Did I? I'm not sure. Probably not. But at any rate, thanks folks. We'll see you all down the trail, and everybody have a safe and happy week. All right, let's go.